Okay. Let us get this show on the road. Hello, everyone. Eric Hörst back with the Training Cafe for climbers. After all, I am a climber of many years and a coach of decades, and I'm here on the Training Cafe to talk training, performance, nutrition, injury, answer some of your questions. And while we wait for some folks to filter in here, let me just give you a brief backstory of the Training Cafe. This live stream was born during the COVID era. We were all locked down at home, and I was looking for a way to stay connected to climbers around the world. And, I have my different websites, trainingforclimbing.com and my Training for Climbing YouTube channel and Instagram page. Many of you may be viewing on those socials right now. And I wanted to add something during the COVID era, a live, discussion about training and climbing and just staying excited and engaged and motivated through that terrible COVID era that was 2020. 4 years ago. Thank goodness it's largely behind us at this stage of the game. But I kept going for quite some time with weekly or every other week training cafes, often on Mondays at noon, which is what we're doing here today, noon Eastern time, 1600 GMT. And we gather, and I typically have a topic I talk a few minutes about, and then I answer training questions from the viewers. And so if you are viewing live, especially if you're on the Training for Climbing YouTube channel, you can type into the comments box a question. It could be about training, injury, nutrition, outdoor climbing performance. I'll try to answer it, and if I can't answer it, I'll tell you who can answer it, because I've been in this business a long time, and I know doctors and registered dietitians and various researchers. And, if I can't answer a question, I can probably tell you who can when it comes to a wide range of topics. So in any case, if you have something you want me to touch on later on in this episode, we're going to be here for 30, 40 minutes typically. And I'm going to try to get back into the groove of doing these maybe every other Monday as we head through the fall and into the winter season to, again, be re-engaged. I think I've missed like the last 4 months. I've been just so busy. I've been traveling a lot. I am very engaged in climbing and business, and still some family activities that, it's a lot of balls to keep juggling in the air. I'm sure many of you can relate to the challenges of scheduling all those things into, 24-hour time slots and weekly, calendar schedules. And so I'm going to try to get back into the habit of doing these training cafes. And so I guess this one, it's the first time I've been, back on air live since the Olympics. So let me first sound in a bit on that. Oh, and one thing about the Training Cafe is to bring your own coffee or favorite beverage, could be a protein shake, because we can raise our glasses together. Climbers around the world uniting here at the Training Cafe. So let's sip coffee or protein, or if you're in Europe, perhaps it's time for the evening beer already. So we sip the coffee together and we commune here at the Training Cafe. And so that's just a little ritual we have here every episode. But with regard to the Olympics, I know not every climber's a fan of it, especially the older climbers, my generation. Some of them aren't fans of climbing as a competitive sport, but I love it. It's quite different experience than outdoor climbing, which is what many of us, view as climbing. The indoors being a method of training for the outdoors. But the standalone competitions, speed, bouldering, lead climbing, have their own merit. The athletic displays are incredible because I'm still a pretty honed climber for my age, and I'm sure I couldn't touch any of those boulders that we see in these World Cups or Olympic events. And I know quite a few of the players on that big stage, and it's great to see them. Many of them really incredible outdoor climbers performing well on plastic walls as well. But definitely a shout out to the gold medalists for women, Janja Gambrit doing it again, just amazing. She is the GOAT, obviously. Really happy for Brooke Rabatou, who is a climber I know here, of course, United States climber. And then Jessie Pills getting bronze, she's been around on the circuit for quite some time. I think I first saw her live in Chamonix maybe in 2015, 2018, I can't remember, one of those years. And so she's just an amazing person and climber as well. And for the men, young Toby Roberts, gold, Serrato from Japan, silver. Those guys, I think, but maybe 19 years old. So we may see them crushing in Los Angeles in 2028. And Jakob Schubert, kind of the veteran of the bunch, getting bronze again, I think, right? Didn't he get bronze in Tokyo in 2021? Speed climbing, I'm not the hugest fan of, but it was really, interesting to see how close it was, just hundredths of a second. The Indonesian climber, Leonardo, I believe was his name, winning gold. That a first for Indonesia. So really cool to see our sport, having, several continents involved on this global stage, competing for medals. Sam Watson, the young American climber, getting bronze, even though as part of the Olympic process, he set a new world record, 5.74 seconds. So just mind-boggling, as they say, the fastest Olympian out there in terms of, the quickest event to play out is speed climbing, about, 4 seconds faster than the 100-meter dash. And then let's not forget for the ladies, Alexandria Miroslav, the incredible Polish speed climber. She's been around, it seems, for many years, kind of a veteran and very deserving of the first gold medal in speed climbing as a standalone event. So my feelings were, I kind of love the Olympic climbing. I know it's not for everybody, and it's something that we'll see again in 4 years in Los Angeles. I would love if I could witness that in person, because I've been to a few World Cup events, both in Europe and the United States, and they are amazing events to be at generally, to witness the climbing with your own eyes and to be part of the crowd and the spirit of the event. If you ever have a chance to attend a World Cup, I would encourage you to do so. Okay, so let's get on to the topic of the day, which is training for the autumn sen season. If you're like me, if you're a Northern Hemisphere climber, we've been sweating it out through the summer season. It's now mid-August. Here where I live in the East Coast of the United States, Pennsylvania, August is known for being very humid, lots of moisture in the air, oppressive heat and humidity kind of combined. Temperatures often around 30 Celsius, 90 Fahrenheit, with the high humidity makes it very uncomfortable for outdoor climbing. And I don't climb outdoors this time of year here in the Eastern US. I did when I was a young man and maybe more enthusiastic and tolerant, but now I'm smarter and wiser, and I have a home gym that's air conditioned, so I can be training this time of year and then saving my travel time and resources for the autumn season when the conditions get better. And, I'm going to spend much of the fall at the Red River Gorge. That's the plan. Kind of work one day down there and climb one day and see how long I can keep that going through the autumn season. October, November being the best months at the Red River Gorge, in my opinion. And so that's when I'll be heading down there. So that means I have another 6 or 8 weeks to kind of get honed for my autumn projects. And maybe you're in a similar situation where, perhaps you're climbing a little bit outdoors now, depending where you're at. If you're in the higher elevations of the Western US or in Europe, perhaps it's some pretty good climbing weather right now. But at virtually sea level here where I'm at in Pennsylvania, it would be terrible outdoor climbing conditions. So I'm in training mode, And, I did travel this summer out to the Western US and was, living out of a van for a while. And so I really didn't do any training other than my actual climbing, which was mostly route climbing, standing on my feet. And naturally, when you're standing on your feet climbing routes, you tend to get weaker. Your endurance can really stick around well if you're climbing frequently, but your maximum strength, what we develop in the gym in terms of grip strength and, our strength throughout our pulling chain of muscles, will often decline when you're on a long road trip. And so definitely for me, being an older climber coming home from a road trip of more than a month, I lost my edge when it comes to strength and power. And so that's kind of my initial focus here, returning home. I did take a bit of a deload after my trip for a week or so just to kind of get mentally and physically fresh and ready. And now I'm diving back into a training block for the next few weeks, which will initially be focused more on strength and power, kind of putting in 2 sessions a week that are strength power oriented, weighted hangs, a little bit of campusing, a bit of bouldering, a few power intervals on the tread wall. And I'm also putting in a couple of aerobic sessions as well, because as a route climber, first and foremost, you need to really maintain your aerobic energy system, both your generalized cardiovascular system and your climbing specific aerobic system should really be maintained year round. If you're a route climber, it's a lot of work to do. You can't really take a lot of time off if you're a route climber because you will lose that aerobic capacity and you will, kind of set yourself back. It takes time to get that back in shape. It's just like a runner, a competitive runner basically does base running year round because they need to maintain that aerobic base. If you're a strength power athlete, like a sprinter or just a boulderer or a gymnast, you don't need to do a lot of that aerobic training. It's not a big part of those types of sports, but if you're a route climber, it's indispensable. And so 2 days a week is kind of the minimum for either getting on a rope or getting into the gym and doing circuits, spray wall intervals, tread wall intervals, things that really train that aerobic energy system. So I'm kind of doing that 2 days a week and then 2 of those strength power sessions per week. And then in addition to that, I do some running, some generalized aerobic training, not a massive amount of running, but a few days a week. And, some other things to kind of just, as an older climber, keep my shoulders strong and, doing a little bit of that antagonist training that I've been preaching about for decades, and many other climbing coaches, of course, stress the importance of as well. So it's a lot to kind of program into the week. It might all together add up to being 10 or 12 hours of training. So depending on your perspective, that could be a lot, that could be a little, but for me, that's the right amount for me to do here. And so that's kind of the rest of August, maybe into early September. And then the last couple of weeks before I head into my outdoor performance climbing season, those last few weeks, I will do a lot more in terms of shifting towards power endurance type exercises, the most pumpy, grueling, where your forearms are exploding, that type of power endurance. It's very lactic. It's that anaerobic lactic energy system that is going to be targeted in those last few weeks. That's the energy system that's the least trainable. It's also the one that spins up the fastest. So for me to be training that now 2 months ahead of outdoor climbing season, for me, it isn't beneficial. It's the last few weeks, kind of that transition into the outdoor season where you want to do the bulk of your power endurance training. So at that point, kind of as I get into late September, let's say, my week might involve 2 aerobic kind of focus sessions in climbing, 2 of those power endurance, that's the anaerobic lactic energy systems. Those would be like doing 30 to 60 second all out, like max climbs on a spray wall, or going to the gym, putting a rope on and climbing at or near your limit on routes that really press you to the point of failure or almost to the point of failure. Bouldering 4x4s are very much anaerobic lactic focused. Repeaters like 7-3 repeaters on a hangboard to failure or to near failure. Pull-up intervals, all of those types of interval protocols that are very stressful, very grueling, very pumpy. While they do call on the aerobic energy system, especially to drive the recovery between the work intervals, the work intervals themselves are very much the most stressful on that lactic energy system. And thus, they are the go-to exercises for really targeting power endurance, which again is kind of the last thing you want to train before you transition to a performance period of climbing, which for me will hopefully be maybe 6 weeks at the Red River Gorge. And so I want to kind of hit the ground running down there, being back in my top shape if possible, and hopefully ready to send. So that's how my rest of the summer and autumn season will shape up. I want to now segue into kind of the last part of the Training Cafe here, which is answering any training questions that you have out there. If you can type them into the comments box. I haven't done this in a while, so hopefully we're getting fed out to YouTube and it looks like we're getting successfully fed into Instagram. So if anybody wants to type a comment into Instagram or a question, you're welcome to do that. And also, if there's anybody following on the Training for Climbing Facebook channel, again, I'm happy to answer the question. One thing that pops up oftentimes relates to injury, because climbing is hard on the body, and many of us, myself included, have to deal with periods of aches and pains. Oftentimes it reveals as something just very mild. Like for me, I've been dealing with a little bit of tenderness. And this dates back to actually late last winter when I was doing some kilter boarding. I seemed to get a little tenosynovitis. I don't think it was a pulley injury. It didn't have kind of the feel of that, but just a general irritation. And I talked to a couple of my doctor friends, Volker Schofel, the finger expert in Germany, and Yasser El-Sheikh, the finger expert in Canada, both thankfully good friends of mine and good resources. And they both felt it was little tenosynovitis that is not uncommon, but is not to be mistaken for a pulley injury that would require a splint, let's say, to help the healing process. The tenosynovitis, kind of taking some anti-inflammatories, doing a little bit of icing, and of course, removing the most provoking exercises. So for me, at that time, when it kind of first appeared, it was the kilter boarding that I was doing twice a week back in January, February, that I think I just went a little too hard. My sessions were a little too long for as fingery as they were. And so I began to feel a little bit of this aggravation and swelling. But again, it wasn't a pulley. It was kind of an inflammation of the sheath that the pulley, that the flexor tendon slides through. And so I was able to nip it in the bud by just kind of dialing things back and being a little more prudent with my training and taking some anti-inflammatories, not long-term, but just for a couple of weeks to kind of help it hopefully begin to resolve. And then I was able to shift into my outdoor climbing this spring and summer, and it did not really return until just, a couple days ago when I did some fingerboarding. I felt just a smidge of it. So it was enough just to make me aware that it wasn't maybe completely healed, and I need to proceed carefully with my training because I want to go into that autumn climbing season healthy. That's the worst thing, is when you're going into your performance season or heading to your project and you do have an ache or a pain somewhere. And so that's why I'm very active in encouraging climbers to not stick their head in the sand when it comes to climbing injuries, and address them realistically early on, and hopefully nip them in the bud, and take action as best as you can. Okay, got a couple of questions here from Derek, my buddy at the Red River Gorge. He says currently he can only get outdoors 1 day a week. What should the rest of my week look like once the performance phase arrives, which he says in parentheses is November? Yeah, he likes that cold weather. He's one of those guys that is out when it's 5 degrees Celsius and 40 Fahrenheit. For me, that's a little too cold, but I get it. My sons are that way too. And during that prime climbing season, Derek, man, I would love if you could get outside twice a week, just because you work so hard year round. I know how hard you work on your training, and to only get 1 day outside a week when the weather's perfect, that's a real shame. But I respect that you are a busy person and have other things going on, and you climb really hard for only 1 day a week. But the rest of your week, when you are really focused on trying to make that 1 day the best you can be, I would say make sure that the 2 days prior to that 1 day outside are rest days. Now, you could do some stretching, you could do some running, you could do a little bit of very light hangboarding or moving on a wall, just kind of arcing, but nothing stressful, nothing that gets you pumped, no heavy duty training the last 2 days before you climb outside. Because if you really hammer your nervous system hard, it takes a few days to recover. So let's say your outdoor day is Saturday. I think you would want Thursday and Friday to be virtual, almost totally rest days. Again, maybe something light on Thursday, nothing on Friday. So your last really hard workout might be the Wednesday before your Saturday of outdoor performance climbing. And now you could do, I guess maybe one good approach would be to go pretty hard on Monday and Wednesday, and maybe do just some light activity on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And then again, that's assuming you're going to be climbing hard outdoors on Saturday. You can't cram when it comes to training. I say that all the time. And so like if you are heading outdoors as a weekend warrior, you kind of shoot yourself in the foot if you do a really hard session on Thursday, thinking it's going to help you climb better Saturday morning when you get out. It's not. In most cases, it's going to be counterproductive because you're going to get out Saturday morning and not be 100% recovered. So, okay, on to another question here. This one from Michael Jerome. How many days during a deload week before a short trip should be total rest? He says he's planning on resting for 4 of 5 days before a trip, with a short session 3 days out. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of factors, and it sounds like, you have a good understanding of things, that, you don't want to undervalue those rest days. That being said, you can't rest yourself into being a better climber. So like long term, you need to get those training days in. And so that's why it's nice to have training blocks where you have, like right now, I have the next 6 or 8 weeks where I'm not going to climb outside. I'm in training mode. So if I'm not completely recovered going into another workout, it's not catastrophic unless I get injured in the process. But when you're climbing outside regularly, it can be, like I said, you shoot yourself in the foot by not resting enough. And so those deloads are very helpful, like especially coming out of a training block before a trip. That might be kind of what you're alluding to here. And so for an older climber like myself, I need like 4 or 5 days when I'm finishing a heavy training block to get fully recovered. The nervous system takes the longest. It can be, if you do a lot of very stressful training on the nervous system, things like weighted hangs, weighted climbing, climbing with a weight belt on, BFR training. I will occasionally do some bits of BFR training with straps around my arms and doing various grip exercises. I'm not a fan of hanging or climbing with BFR straps on. That's probably not a good approach for most people. It messes with just how your body works climbing. I like doing standing exercises with dumbbells or plates in my hands, or even pulling on a force board, force gauge with the straps on. And when you're doing that type of BFR training, you cycle through all the motor units if you do a real rigorous session, and it can be really hard on the nervous system. It's an incredible stimulus, but it's easy to do too much of. I think the BFR training is something that you dabble in, just a bit here, a bit there, kind of like campus boarding. If you do too much of it, like campus boarding, you can overstimulate and actually maybe, become injured. So there's a lot of factors, like how rigorous were your sessions? How many weeks did you go really hard since your last deload? How old are you? Someone who's a 20-something is going to recover a lot faster than an old guy. And so I would say minimum 3-day deload, just to answer your question here. Minimum 3. If you've been going really hard, maybe 4. And ultimately, if you're coming out of a training block, heading into a performance block, think of it almost as like a 7-day taper. So like, you count back 7 days from your first outdoor climbing performance, and maybe the 3 days before performance are near total rest. Then day 4, day 5 might be lighter workouts. Day 6, day 7 could be harder workouts, but just briefer. So high intensity, but briefer in terms of total volume. And so think of that kind of as a 7-day taper that leads you through the deload into your performance period. So I hope that makes some sense there. Okay, next question here is it worth to train weighted hangs on bigger holds, or is it more beneficial to use smaller ones where you feel more comfortable within? Okay, that's a very important concept that I get asked a lot. And the first thing you need to know is if you're training on edges that are deeper than your first pad, okay, this DIP joint is the main thing when you're training on a fingerboard. You want to be training things that are on holds that are smaller than this pad, because as soon as you go to something deeper that is PIP joint focused, the architecture of the forms is such that there's 2 flexor tendons, one that flexes this joint and one that flexes this joint. And while they both need to be trained, and they are both contributing when you're hanging, it's when you're hanging on smaller holds, typically less than about 25 millimeters or less than 1 inch or less than the depth of your first pad, that you isolate that DIP joint. And so most finger training should be done, not all, but most finger training should be done on holds that are less than 25 millimeters. For me, I mostly train on a 14 millimeter edge or a 20 millimeter edge. And so using that size edge, if you're new to hangboard training, you're probably getting enough stimulus and enough resistance from just your body weight. For me, I've been training on hangboards for decades. For me to do max hangs on a 14 millimeter, while I do some warm-ups at body weight, I'm adding a lot of extra weight. When I'm really fit, up to 100 pounds onto a loading pin clipped into my harness, and I'm doing 7-second hangs, the 753 protocol on a 14 millimeter edge. So I've trained up to that over decades. Now, of course, there's, these young pro climbers, my friend Alex Megos is doing one-arm stuff on a 14 millimeter edge, and it's easy. He has to hold a dumbbell on his free hand. So, it's all relative. It's about finding what is the proper weight for you. And so for most climbers, again, you want to use a smaller hold, I say between 14 and 20 millimeters, and maybe initially train at body weight, but add weight as needed to make a 7-second hang pretty hard. And again, I'm a fan of the 753 protocol for max weighted hangs. So that's 7-second hang, 53-second rest, 7-second hang, 53-second rest, and then one more time, 7-second hang, 53-second rest. So there's 3 hangs in 3 minutes total. Then you rest 5 minutes, and then you do another block of 3 hangs. And I typically repeat that 3 or 4 times, and increasing the weight a little bit with each set as I kind of get, the muscles fully activated. Again, that's a max grip protocol designed to really strengthen that DIP joint for grabbing small holds. Now, there is some benefit to using even smaller holds. I just do a little bit of this. I have an Ava Lopez board that has like a 6 and an 8 millimeter edge, and they're actually quite painful. But that's part of the training when you're hanging small edges, is being able to tolerate the skin pain and get some skin adaptations and develop this pulp at the end of your fingers, which is actually important. So I will usually, on the same workout that I'm doing the weighted hangs, I'll do just a few body weight hangs on 6 and 8 millimeters just to know what it feels like and to really kind of isolate on that edge. But to do a lot of that training, it's very painful. It just doesn't feel like something you want to do a lot of. Whereas the weighted hangs for me on a 14 or a 20 millimeter edge, I feel like I can do adequate, volume and not have pain, skin pain, being problematic for me. Again, there are many other ways to go about all of this. Training in a standing position using a force gauge like the Pitch 6 force gauge, or lifting weights off the ground. There's benefits to doing some of that kind of training as well. Don't want to go there right now. Okay, next question from, whoops, I lost it here. Let me see here. Oh boy. I'm hopefully didn't lose Vengasalis, my buddy Justin. Oh boy, I might have lost the question there. How do I see comments here? I'm kind of new to doing this feed on Instagram. In the past, I've done it mostly on YouTube and Facebook. So Justin, I might have lost your comment here or your question. So if you want to type it back in quick, I can address it. I do want to wrap up this episode here in a few minutes. So let me just see here if I can see those comments on this interface. Can't post comments to, let's see. Sorry about this, friends, but it looks like my recording software here, StreamYard, is not importing the questions being left on Instagram. I'm only seeing questions from Facebook and YouTube. Okay, another question that just popped in here from Dale. Sounds like he's a climbing dad. What age is 13-year-old too young to start fingerboarding? That's a very common and important question. So I'm not someone who says that these youth climbers should never touch a fingerboard or a campus board. They need to be monitored, and it needs to be appropriate for age, experience, and also their growth behaviors. I had 2 sons who went through the youth climbing years, climbing very hard. 5'14" climbers. They played football. They did a lot of sports, and thankfully never got any serious finger injuries. They're both adults now, so it's a non-factor for them. But when it comes to these growth plate injuries, and they happen to both female and male climbers, and they happen during the basically 2 years of peak growth velocity. So the important thing here, Dale, is when your son or daughter is growing the fastest. Now, girls hit puberty earlier, 10, 11 versus boys often 13, maybe 14, late bloomer 15. But most kids hit a 2-year period where they get most of their growth. For my son, my older son, Cameron, his growth spurt was kind of age 13 to 15. Jonathan, my younger son, his growth spurt was like way later. It was like 15 to 17. He grew like a foot in 2 years. He's now 6'3". But in any case, when they grow the fastest, and during the years that they grow the fastest, are when the growth plates are softest and most prone to injury. And the ones that are most prone to injury are the 2 long fingers. So it presents as pain in this middle knuckle. And both of my sons experienced some mild pain. So that's when we knew, okay, we need to dial things back. So we did less bouldering on small holds. We did virtually no hangboarding or campus boarding, just very light, big hold stuff, kind of warm-up activities. But the stuff where you're grabbing on that PIP joint, where or the DIP joint, and the middle joint, PIP, is at 90 degrees. Anything that like is repetitive like that is very stressful and shears that growth plate and can crack it and break it. And if not immediately withdrawn from climbing, can lead to deformed fingers. There are adult climbers now with bent fingers, some of them famous climbers with bent fingers because they had a growth plate injury, maybe didn't know it, or climbed through it, or wasn't properly taken care of, and they have deformed fingers now as adults because of that growth plate injury. And so growth plate injury is not the end of the world, but you immediately need to withdraw from climbing for 6 months or so to let that heal. When you start to get mild pain, when the youth starts to feel mild pain, it's not likely a fracture yet, but it's a warning. It's a kind of a yellow light to dial back training and remove the fingerboarding. So I don't want to give a hard answer to the question, but when in doubt, kids shouldn't be on a fingerboard or a hangboard. And definitely if they have any pain in their knuckles, they shouldn't be on a hangboard or fingerboard. But they also should not be doing a lot of limit bouldering because, quite frankly, limit bouldering on small holds is just as stressful. And it's that repetitive, nature that is serious. So in any case, I think parents and coaches should talk to their youth climbers daily or weekly. How do your fingers feel? What aches and pains do you have? And also be aware to other injuries that can appear. You can get growth plate injuries in your knees, your heels. If you play soccer or run, those are not uncommon either amongst fast-growing youth athletes. And so again, it's a phase. You tell the kids when they start feeling the knuckle pain, yeah, it sucks, but it's something we're going to work through here in the next 6 to 12 months. Eventually, your growth plates will fuse, and you'll never have to think about it again. So hopefully that was a little bit of information. I, again, don't want to give hard answers. Kids before that growth spurt, 8, 10, 12-year-olds can tinker around on a hangboard or a campus board, and they're almost bulletproof just because they're so soft and pliable, and they don't weigh anything yet. When they hit the growth spurt and they start packing on body weight, especially the guys can put on 10 or 20 pounds in a year, it's a lot of extra weight that their body has to learn to accommodate. And again, that can be injurious. Okay, I got Justin's question back here from Vengasalis. If you were forced to take 8 months off from climbing and training, where would you pick back up and start rebuilding? Yeah, again, it kind of depends on age and who you are. If it was me and I took 8 months off, it would be devastating because, old guys, if you don't use it, you lose it really, really fast. So I'd have to start way back. Someone younger in their 20s or 30s, if they stayed in shape, like if they stopped climbing for 8 months, but they kept biking or running or lifting weights, I think they would come back to climbing really fast. You don't really lose your technical and mental skills so much, but you do lose that climbing specific fitness. And so for a 20-year-old who stays in shape or a 30-year-old who stays in shape, an 8-month layoff, you could probably return to climbing shape pretty fast. Maybe spin back up your training over a month just to kind of get it back together, and then you might be able to hit the ground running. Now, if you took 8 months off and did nothing, you would really degrade, physically from head to toe, and so that could be a real bad thing. And so you'd want to really work back into that slowly. So I hope you're not taking 8 months off, Justin. But if you are, we can talk about it in person sometime. Okay, question here from question. Let me see here. Jay Smith, PT. Hey, Jay. What's the most effective way to train biceps for climbing? He says, serious question. Do you favor pull-ups or isolation work of some sort, rep scheme? All of the above. A lot of variety. Pull-ups are the obvious thing that climbers always have done a lot of. Back when I started training 45 years ago, there weren't climbing walls, there weren't hangboards, there were pull-up bars. So we did a lot of pull-ups. We were real gluttons for punishment. And we would vary things. We'd do pull-ups, with different grip widths. We would put our feet up. Before the advent of sling trainers, we would put our feet up on a box and change the position of our torso so that you're pulling, in different planes, doing kind of rowing, because obviously as you get on steeper stuff, your muscles are working differently. So I like to do a variety of things. I also have a, reverse curl bar, which I really like to do, train the brachioradialis quite specifically. I do a little bit of pull-up exercises like this, not a lot. About the one only exercise I don't do any of is like traditional barbell curls, like the bodybuilders do, for the biceps. It's like, yeah, you could argue undercling moves work that, but again, doing 1 or 2 sets of palms facing, chin-ups as they're called, would put your arm in that position, that undercling position. And so I tend to stay away from the traditional barbell exercises and pumping out the biceps like bodybuilders would do, because I had an expert in biomechanics explain to me, 20 or 30 years ago, that big biceps are actually a bit of a curse for climbers. Now, my biceps are, sizable for an old guy. They're not huge. But when you're trying to lock off, when you're climbing, your bicep is getting in the way of this lock off. And so, one beautiful thing about, watching some of these female climbers that have incredible flexibility, their range of motion is massive, and their lock off, their end range strength is crazy because they don't have these big hulking biceps in the way. So they can lock off, close that angle up, and almost, be in a quasi resting position at a lock off. Whereas a guy with a big bicep who can't get their arm bent more than this, it's pretty damn hard to lock off. It's effortful to reach up on a big move. And so why do anything purposefully to make your biceps bigger? And so I do a variety of pulling exercises, as I mentioned. I do a lot of, I do some weighted pull-up training, small, sets in terms of reps, generally 5 rep sets. And that does result in a little bit of hypertrophy. But I'm not doing anything specifically with the intention of making my biceps bigger. I think that would be counterproductive for climbers. So avoid maybe those traditional, like bodybuilding 10 rep sets of bicep curls, probably counterproductive. Okay. Thoughts on HRT for men over 40? Yeah, I think about that a lot and research that a lot. I've been taking thyroid hormone, a supplemental thyroid hormone, for several years because my physician determined I'm very active in getting physicals and blood work. So thyroid hormone would be one thing. I guess it's not technically HRT. HRT is more testosterone and things like that. And as our bodies change, I don't think people should balk on supplementing or using pharmaceuticals as guided by a doctor or a functional medicine specialist to help keep them in an optimal range. And so, like in the case of my thyroid, I was chronically cold, sitting in my house with a down coat on when everybody else has t-shirts. My heart rate was really slow. My appendages, cold hands and feet. And so we did some blood work and started to do some detective work. And I was anemic. I had low red blood cell count. I had low thyroid hormone count. I was kind of subclinical classification, but there's no downside to supplementing with some thyroid hormone. And so I've been doing that, and we've been tweaking it over the last 5 years, and my body runs warmer. I think I recover a little faster. So those are all steps in the right direction. And same thing, if you identify that your hormone, your free testosterone, let's say, is low, I don't have any issue with a person correcting that with physiological doses. Again, anything could be done overboard or too extreme. And I know from listening to the Huberman podcast, he talks about his own personal experience as a middle-aged athlete, supplementing with physiological doses, like 100 milligrams a week or a day, something like that, to get him back to where he would have been, let's say, in his 20s and 30s. And so I think as you get older, someone like myself to use thyroid or testosterone replacement makes sense, not only for athletic performance, but just for mental, cognitive effects, longevity. We're talking about getting you back to optimal as opposed to just letting nature take its course. Think about this. 100 years ago, people my age were dead. Okay, I'm 60 years old. The life expectancy at the turn of the last century was 50 years old. So, the average person was dying around age 50, at least statistically. I'm 60 and still in pretty good shape, still, trying to be very active and live and climb like a younger person. And, our bodies are over millennia genetically programmed to wind down quickly at age 40, 50, 60, because we don't want to, as a, 1,000 years ago, you wouldn't want to be having kids if you're a woman in your 50s and 60s. Things are just falling apart. You're done with. You have no purpose of living anymore. But now in modern era where we have healthcare and we can combat a lot of illnesses and live richer, fuller, healthier lives, I hope to live to be 100 or 110. I hope to climb hard till I'm 80. And so we need to fight kind of that genetic programming and try to offset or counteract things that change for the worse. In my case, the thyroid hormone dysfunctioning, that I can supplement every morning when I wake up 60 milligrams of Armour Thyroid, and I've corrected something that wasn't working well in my body anymore. And so I think HRT done right is probably kind of the same deal. And I know, a fair number of climbers, older, over 50 climbers who are doing that. I would not recommend, and I get asked by 25 and 30-year-old climbers, they think their testosterone's low. And I think it's ridiculous for those folks to be thinking about anything like that under age 40. You need to eat right, train right, sleep right, supplement right. There's a lot of things you can do to improve your hormone profiles that don't involve HRT. And I think you have to exhaust all of those things and be over 40 before you should probably be thinking about doing anything. So that's my 2 cents there. Okay. I have been long-winded, as I am known to be. And so I think it's about time for me to sign off this episode of the Training Cafe. Again, I started doing these back around COVID and then kind of gradually fell out of the habit as life got busy again. And I want to try to circle back, get more regular. Maybe you guys can keep me accounted for on doing these every week or two at noon on Mondays. And I'm trying to get my software set up so I can stream simultaneously on my Training for Climbing YouTube channel, Training for Climbing Facebook page, and the Training for Climbing Instagram. And I'm still working on that. I think today I got us on all three platforms, but it seems like I'm only getting the questions that are submitted on Instagram for some reason. So hopefully I can work out those wrinkles. If anybody knows technically how I can do that more effectively, I'd be happy to hear from you. You can reach me on my personal Instagram at Eric Hörst. You can drop me a message there. And hopefully we'll cross paths here in a training cafe in a couple of weeks once again, or maybe I'll even see you at the Crags this fall or in a gym somewhere this winter. So thanks for joining me at the Training Cafe with coffee. Eric Hörst signing off.